Good evening, everyone. Welcome, comrades and friends, to Workers' World Party's live stream, where hundreds of revolutionaries from across the world gather to strategize, to analyze, and to build a struggle for a socialist future, a workers' world. If you could take a second to go to Workers' World Party's Facebook page, facebook.com/Workers' World Party, and share this live video with your friends and in your Facebook groups and pages, that would help us enormously to reach more members of our class. And in your Facebook, also, we encourage you to share your comments at Workers World on Twitter. We're also on live on YouTube tonight. Please make sure to share your live stream video on Facebook, Twitter, wherever you can post on social media. Comrades and friends, welcome to this special commemorative webinar in tribute to the heroic Attica prison uprising that took place 50 years ago and whose legacy continues to resonate today, both inside and outside the prison walls. My name is Monica Moorehead, she, her. I am a managing editor of Workers' World newspaper and a member of the Prisoner Solidarity Committee of Workers' World Party. I will be co-facilitating this program with Mirinda Crissman, they, them. Mirinda is a co-editor of Tear Down the Walls and co-chair of the Prisoners Solidarity Committee of Workers' World Party. They write and organize around prison abolition, anti-imperialism, and the environment. I know I speak for many revolutionaries and activists of my generation in saying that Black August, especially in the early 1970s, and the Attica Prison Rebellion, played a significant role in our political development and activism. I had just graduated from high school in Hampton, Virginia, when Jonathan Jackson attempted to free his brother, George Jackson, an imprisoned leader of the Black Panther Party. Also, MAGEE, another political prisoner who to this day has been incarcerated for over 58 years. And others, when Jonathan took a judge and others hostage in a Marin County courtroom in San Rafael, California, on August 7th, 1970. It was a prelude of what was to come at Attica in 1971. And even though Jonathan, at the tender age of 17, and others were brutally slaughtered by the police, this daring escape attempt had a profound impact on the movement over 50 years ago and even now. Our party declared Jonathan and his companions as heroes, while others in the movement were critical of their actions. This daring raid reflected the desire of oppressed peoples here and worldwide, Black, Asian, Arab, and Latinx, to free themselves from centuries-old racism, colonialism, and imperialism by any means necessary, including armed resistance. This daring raid also exposed that the only response from the state to any kind of rebellion, big or small, by the most suppressed, is legalized terror on behalf of the oppressor with no compromise, and that the bestiality of the state-sanctioned violence is really a sign of fear and trepidation that those in power always have for the masses whenever their class rule is challenged. Fast forward to 1 year later, when George Jackson was assassinated at San Quentin Prison on August 21st, 1971, almost 1 year to the day that Jonathan was murdered. George's book, Soledad Brother, had resonated throughout the movement inside and outside the prisons. His second book, Blood in My Eye, was released days after his murder. Thousands attended his funeral. George was a self-taught Marxist-Leninist revolutionary who preached global revolution during the 11 years he was imprisoned until the day he died at the age of 29. Huey P. Newton, a founder of the Black Panther Party, gave the eulogy at George's funeral. Part of that eulogy states, and I quote, "George was a legendary figure all through the prison system, where he spent most of his life. You know, a legendary figure is known to most people through the idea or through the concept, or essentially through the spirit. So I met George through the spirit. I say that the legendary figure is also a hero. He set a standard for prisoners, political prisoners, for people. He showed the love, the strength, the revolutionary fervor that's characteristic of any soldier for the people. So we know that spiritual things can also manifest themselves in some physical act through a physical mechanism. I saw prisoners who knew about this legendary figure act in such a way, putting his ideas to life. So therefore, the spirit became a life," end quote. Huey's words reflected how much George was loved and respected by incarcerated revolutionaries everywhere, including Attica. In less than a month after George's death, Attica prisoners went on a hunger strike, wearing Black armbands in honor of their fallen hero, and also in protest of horrid conditions and treatment. Soon afterwards, on September 9th, 1971, they had taken 9 to 10 guards hostage before taking over the prison. I will never forget, as a 19-year-old, seeing this rebellion unfold on TV, as much as the bourgeois press would allow you to see, and also they didn't want to show the oppressed fighting back. There was no social media back then, so all you could really rely on was TV coverage. But we were so lucky to interview Comrade Jorge Nieves, a leader of the Young Lords and who survived the Attica massacre of 42 people, the majority of them prisoners, on September 13th. He shared his experiences with us during those 4 historic days when the prisoners dared to take destiny into their own hands. And the Prisoner Solidarity Committee of Youth Against War and Fascism, founded just 1 year before Attica, to show solidarity with growing struggles of prisoners and their families, was so honored to be invited by leaders of the uprising to help give voice to the prisoners' profound demands to the outside world. And you will hear Che speak with reverence that he and others had for our PSC representative, Tom Soto, when he came to Attica. And I will share some archival photos of the PSC's coverage of the rebellion later on during the webinar. I want to end my remarks with some quotes from a commentary written by Workers' World Party's first secretary, Larry Holmes, back in 2016. Quote, "The significance of the Attica uprising as a prison rebellion transcends prison. Attica was a high water mark in the Black liberation movement of the 1960s and 70s. It was almost the Black liberation movement's Paris Commune of 100 years before in France in 1871. Attica was spontaneous, but to the extent that it was led, it was organized by revolutionaries, highly political individuals who considered themselves Marxist, Maoist, Black liberationists. They organized committees for food, for negotiations. They put together 26 demands in a few hours. Their demands addressed every aspect of survival in prison: health, food, an end to solitary confinement, legal rights, the right to family visitation, the right to get political material in the mail. Particularly noteworthy in relation to a 2016 national prison strike is that almost 1/3 of their demands address prisoner labor rights. And this is from their statement. We demand an end to prison labor exploitation. Prisoners who refuse to work are punished and segregated. This is a class issue. Their demands included prisoners should be considered as workers. The workday should be 8 hours. Prisoners should have the right to form a union. Prisons should be made to conform to New York State labor laws, including wages and workers' compensation for accidents. Prisoners should have access to vocational training, union pay scales, union membership, end quote. The prisoners also demanded that they be granted asylum to an anti-imperialist country. The lessons of Black August and Attica are not just about the past, but the present and the future. Their legacies today are about resistance and fight back against capitalism that apply to so many fronts, be they Black Lives Matter, the climate crisis, evictions, and more. Their legacies are about freeing all political prisoners like Rochelle MAGEE, Mumia, Leonard Peltier, Dr. Mutulu Shakur, many others, and also shutting down all aspects of mass incarceration. When Attica martyr L.D. Barkley stated that Attica is the sound before the fury of all the oppressed, he was referring to the multinational voices of Black, brown, and white workers using rebellion just to be visible and heard then, but also now with the evolving multinational, multi-gendered global working class that will one day take its rightful place as being the grave diggers of capitalism. So in conclusion, the Prisoner Solidarity Committee of Workersville Party dedicates this webinar to the fighting spirit of the Attica revolutionaries, to Jonathan and George Jackson, and to Tom Soto, who will continue to inspire future generations to fight for the liberation of workers from all forms of class oppression for a socialist future that will put human needs first. So now we will hear from Che Nieves. I am Monica Moorehead. I'm a member of the Prisoner Solidarity Committee of Workersville Party. I'm honored here today to be interviewing Jorge Che Nieves, who was at Attica in 1971 during the heroic uprising.
Thank you. Thank you. My gratitude to everybody involved and to the Workersville Party, for inviting me to this beautiful occasion so that I could be able to talk about Attica, because remember, Attica will always live, the legacy will continue, and as long as there's people struggling, there's Attica's there, because Attica means fight back. We heard that there was a brother named George Jackson who was murdered. I said, oh shit. Brother George was murdered. And so we in Attica, we started saying, well, what are we gonna do, to commemorate this brother? So some of us said, well, let's formulate a hunger strike where everybody will go into the mess hall, don't say nothing. It was total silence. Many of us had black armbands. The administration, of course, they were very apprehensive. They said, what? They ain't eating? When they come to your cell, they don't come like one. They come like in the goon squad. It's just like the Ku Klux Klan. When the Ku Klux Klan come to burn down a building, to burn down churches, they don't come by one. They come in masses because they're scared to come along. They have to come in masses, and that's how they came. The brother said, nah, man, we ain't going back to ourselves. We're supposed to have recreation. We're going to have recreation. I was in B block. And then from A few minutes after that, I heard the siren. I seen his brother. I seen Sam Melville, you know, and I said, what the hell is he doing here? And he was going, and they were pushing at the door, pushing and pushing and pushing, till eventually it gave in. And the door opened up. The brothers with Sam Melville came in and said, you are free. You are free. Everybody is free now. I looked at him, I said, brother, I'm not totally free yet, but I understand what you're saying. But in A block, there were brothers that were taking hostages. By the time I got there was hostages already. It was close to 40 hostages in a circle. You know, I said, oh shit, this is some real serious shit, man, that's gonna happen here. So let's get it together, man. We were looking, all the leaders of various, you know, the Panthers and the Young Laws and the Black Muslims, we were all looking at the situation that was happening in the yard, and it was very chaotic, you know, and we said, we need to bring some order and discipline into this yard, you know. And so Brother Champ, which happens to be one of the brothers that was well respected by the prison population. He was a jailhouse lawyer, you know, and he was very intelligent, this brother. So he said, so Brother Roger Champ said, I'll take the mic, I'll take a mic and I'll talk to the population. He said, yo, brothers, it is time for us to organize. This is a very serious situation here. Our lives are involved. So let's get our shit together. Let's organize ourselves. In a matter of minutes, everybody just, the whole yard became organized. You know, it became well-disciplined. And we chose one specific brother to run the security. His name was Frank Smith, known as Big Black. Sam Melville was involved. L.D. Barkley was one of our leaders in the committee. And but all of us were selected by the population, and we started talking about who we wanted to come in. We wanted the Young Laws to come in. All the Black Panthers came in. Bobby Seals came in, and we also wanted the Youth Against War and Fascism to come in. And Brother Soto was the one. Brother Soto came to the yard, man. And when I saw this brother, man, I hugged him, man. I said, the first time I met him, I hugged him. I said, brother, I love you, man. He said, I love you too. And I'm going to die here with you. And I said, no, bro, you can't. You got to go back out. No, I'm going to stay here with you. I'm going to die here with you. The brother was a warrior. The brother was a soldier. The brother was a dedicated revolutionary, a total dedicated. He loved his people, you know, and that's what the good things I got to say about Sam Soto. I can't never say nothing bad about because he had nothing bad to say about. You know, that was a brother, man, that, you know, I will always carry him in my heart. And all the Attica brothers as well, they carry Tom Soto in their heart. You know, because he was very well dedicated. We wanted to, first and foremost, get the warden out. We want to get rid of him. You know, we also wanted to establish new visitation rights, you know, and stop ripping off the letters of our loved ones. Stop doing that. We also wanted newspapers to come in because we had a right, you know, to be able to have access to these things, you know, newspapers coming in like Amsterdam News, et cetera, and even the Workers' World Party, the newspaper, you know, we wanted for that to come in as well, and the Black Muslim newspaper, the Core, you know, we wanted that to come in as well, you know, we wanted to have representatives at our parole board hearings. Yeah, we also demanded unions, you know, better working conditions, you know, stop exploring the workers. You know, we talked about all that. We wanted amnesty because we felt that if we gave the prison back to them, we didn't want to see any retaliations. We didn't want to be beaten up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, like they have been beaten up in Rikers Island and Brooklyn House of Detention, the Bronx House of Detention, the Queens House of Detention, the Tombs in Manhattan, all these uprisings that occur in various places in the city, as a result of them giving up the hostages, they were beaten up. There was always consequences. And Governor Rockefeller said, no, I don't care nothing about these prisoners. My main concern, and I'm saying this, my main concern is being the president of the United States. That was my concern. That was my interest. I had political ambitions. I don't care about no prisoners. They don't mean nothing to me. They don't have no value to me. As far as I'm concerned, and I'm saying this because I'm saying it politically, they are slaves, and prisoners are slaves. He didn't want to give in. He didn't want to come to the prison and sit down with us and talk. He didn't want that at all. All he was concerned about is being a president and maintaining law and order. Early in the morning, about 8:30, close to 9 o'clock, outside of the prison, all the guards and the state troopers were armed to the teeth. They were armed. They were ready. They had more guns than people. And that's real. They had more guns than people. And they were ready to come in and kill. Monica, I will tell you that I heard these guards saying, it's white power time. It's white power time. I heard them. They were saying, niggas must die. Niggas must die. And of course I understand why, because most of the people whom they came in to kill was us, people of color. They came in with that intention. Before I went to the war, they put an X on my back. An X was a sign of killing. It was death automatically. They told me to put my head on the wall and put my arms against the wall. And so that's what I did. And a few moments later, I think it was a sergeant, he came and he stopped at me and he said, who do you want us to contact? So I looked at him and I said, you gonna kill me? And he said, who do you want us to contact? And that was it. Meanwhile, there was a state trooper sitting in the back of us with a rifle, ready to shoot us. After the whole shooting stopped, L.D. Barkley was singled out to be killed. Tom Hicks, another brother, was singled out to be killed. Sam Melville was singled out to be killed. Them bullets that they had names on them.
We are men. We are not beasts, and we do not intend to be driven or beaten as such. The entire prison populace has set forth to change forever the ruthless brutalization and disregard for the lives of the prisoners here and throughout the United States. What has happened here is but the sound before the fury of those who are oppressed.
The legacy of Attica will always be a reminder to all of us who are fighting for human rights and freedom, who are fighting for a new society free of racism, abuses, exploitation, and inhumane treatment. A society whose prime interest is the people, who loves the people, and a society that is not capitalist orientated. But the legacy of Attica is resistance. And that's the legacy that Attica left us, that we need to fight, that the only way we're going to maintain our freedom is by fighting. The only way we're going to gain any rights in this country is by fighting. Power to all the people, power to all prisoners, free all our political prisoners.
And that was Comrade Jorge Nieves. He talked about so many important aspects of the uprising he witnessed firsthand. I'm always very struck when imprisoned people compare their situations to that of an enslaved person. That is an accurate portrayal of how prisons, jails, and detention centers have historically functioned and continue to function in our capitalist-run society today. I live and organize in Texas, and I'm a perpetual student of how cages have been institutionalized in this part of the world. Prior to the introduction of chattel slavery in what is now called Texas, Spanish colonizers implemented encomiendas. An encomienda was a grant by the Spanish crown to colonists in the Americas, conferring the right to demand tribute and forced labor from the indigenous inhabitants of that land. Not too long after the reign of Spanish colonizers in this region, African peoples were violently ripped from their continent and subsequently branded as property in order for a few people to accumulate vast fortunes from the spoils of their stolen labor. The beyond brutal system of chattel enslavement reigned unchecked in this part of the world for well over a century up until the Civil War. While enslavement was declared over by Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, it took until June 19, 1865 for its message and Union troops to reach the hundreds of thousands of enslaved people in Texas. And even then, not all enslaved people were freed instantly. In fact, the material conditions of Black people remained largely the same in many ways via sharecropping and a system of convict leasing. Leading up to Union General Gordon Granger's message of emancipation to the people of Galveston, Texas, it was known that this particular state was a safe haven for enslavers. Galveston, with its deep water port, has the oldest known police force in the state. The police protect the property and wealth of the richest people. Like many early police forces on this continent, they served as patrols for enslaved people. Since the capture of New Orleans in 1862, slave owners in Mississippi, Louisiana, and other points east had been migrating to Texas to escape the Union Army's reach. In a hurried reenactment of the original Middle Passage, more than 150,000 enslaved people were moved west to Texas. After news of emancipation reached Texas, the rich still relied on the labor of those who were once legally considered their property. They did what they could to maintain that dominance and super exploitation. That exploitation evolved into systems like sharecropping, where the formerly enslaved still worked in the same Texas fields under similar conditions. Another way the ruling class carried out their will was through the system of convict leasing, which was designed to keep freed Black people legally enslaved. This was sanctioned through a clause which still exists today in the 13th Amendment to the US Constitution. Under this system, the Texas Department of Corrections was formed and immediately hired out incarcerated workers who were often Black and had been arrested by law enforcement for little or no reason, to plantation owners as laborers. Convict leasing could even be worse in some ways than slavery because those exploiting the labor of the leased people had no economic stake whatsoever in their well-being or even in keeping them alive. According to historian Robert Perkinson in Texas Tough, The Rise of America's Prison Empire, more than 3,500 leased incarcerated workers died in Texas between 1866 and 1912, more people than the number lynched in that period. The buildup of material conditions, which precipitated the buildup of prisons in New York State and subsequently that people's struggle at Attica, are not identical to the origin of the prison system in Texas, but the process remains very similar. Also similar to conditions at Attica in 1971 is the state of prisons, jails, and detention centers today. Today, more people are under carceral control than were under chattel enslavement. According to the Prison Policy Initiative, the US criminal and justice system holds over 2.3 million people in 1,833 state prisons, 110 federal prisons, 1,772 juvenile correctional facilities, 3,134 local jails, 218 immigration detention, and 218 immigration detention facilities. This vast interlocking system of oppression also contains military prisons, civil commitment centers, state psychiatric hospitals, and prisons in the US territories. Almost 2.3 million people are confined in the US on a daily basis in these various facilities, but incarceration is just one piece of the much larger system of the criminal and justice system. The so-called US justice system controls over 7 million people, more than half of whom are on probation or on parole. Mass incarceration affects more than those who were locked up themselves. 19 million people have been convicted of a felony of their lifetimes and face discrimination, which is totally legal in the US, and that routinely denies them the ability to vote, find housing, education, employment, among other things crucial to basic human survival. 77 million people in the US have some sort of criminal record following them around. And 113 million adults in the US have an immediate family member who has ever been incarcerated. To understand why there's so many people in prisons, jails, and detention centers, as well as why so many people are affected by them and what purpose they serve, we need not look any further than the people most affected by these cages and those for whom the system was built. By and large, capitalist cages are filled with people oppressed on the basis of race, gender, ability, and other class-based oppressions. Black and brown people are disproportionately locked up. LGBTQ plus people and disabled people are also disproportionately locked up compared to their makeup of the total population. And many people find themselves under multiple axes of interlocking oppressions all at once. Prisons, jails, and detention centers are concentration camps for the poor and the oppressed. Law enforcement rounds up members of our class with strange historical relationships to property and locks them in prisons, jails, and detention centers. Whether their oppression is rooted in the rise of private property like women and gender oppressed people, or whether they are migrants being charged in Texas under Governor Greg Abbott's racist Operation Lone Star with criminal trespassing for simply existing in what is now called Texas. Confinement, imprisonment, incarceration, enslavement, whatever we call it, it serves to keep the oppressed from rising up against their oppressors. Those who have accumulated wealth and property off the backs of working and oppressed peoples. To abolish our current conditions living in the afterlife of enslavement, we must abolish capitalism and the rule of one class over another. Given the historical origins of the prison industrial complex on this continent, and given the kinds of people who end up in these institutions, given the number of people oppressed by it to this day, given the dire conditions people inside face during a global pandemic, if Attica has taught us anything, it is that oppressed peoples do not have to remain quiet as they are targeted for execution by state violence and neglect. Attica also teaches us that the solidarity from people on the outside is critical to ensuring members of our class, the working class, are not slaughtered in silence and forgotten. Attica means fight back, like Che said. And in the spirit of fighting back, we're going to turn now back to Monica Moorehead with a history of Workers' World Party engaged in this crucial struggle.
Thank you, Mirinda. So I want to share some slides with you. It won't be a long presentation, but it's really just to give you a feel for really what was going on back 50 years ago and how our party, through our youth group, Youth Against War and Fascism, was responding, to these tremendous struggles, especially those going on inside the prison walls. So, and also supporting the families of these incarcerated workers who had to travel so far, like hundreds of miles, from the urban areas to the isolated rural areas where most of these prisons were built, just to be able to visit their loved ones just for a few hours, sometimes just once a month. So anyway, this is just a short slideshow to show how our party viewed these prisons, as Mirinda was saying, as concentration camps for the poor. So next. Oh, no, that's okay. This newsletter was put out just months before the Attica rebellion. We were responding to many struggles, as I said before, like in Auburn prison, there were rebellions going on there. Greenhaven, which is where Che was in prison before moving back to Attica, where he was trying to organize the laundry workers at the prison there. So anyway, this just reflects what was going on. The convict labor movement which Mirinda alluded to in their talk. Next. Okay, these are graphics of Rochelle MAGEE and Angela Davis in this Long Live the Spirit of San Rafael. This is when, in response to Jonathan Jackson. Okay, this was when Bobby Seale was being repressed along with the other Panthers, February 1971. Okay, and this was articles about Jonathan and Angela Davis. As I think most people know, Angela Davis was accused of arming Jonathan Jackson when he tried to free his brother. And these were just some of the articles defending Angela. Next. Okay, this is when Huey P. Newton, he was just released from prison. And also, he was also praising Jonathan Jackson's actions. And okay. And this is a very important article that was written on the heroes of San Rafael. Okay, next. This was articles demanding the freedom of the Soledad brothers, including George Jackson, John Cloutier, and Fleta Drumgo before they were moved to San Quentin. Okay, these were demonstrations in solidarity with prisoners. You can see the prisoners waving the white flags outside of their jail cells in acknowledgement of the demonstrations that were held in solidarity with them. It's another article about this, on the first anniversary of the insurrection of San Rafael. Okay, and this was in response to the assassination of George Jackson. This was the front page of Workers' World. Okay. Articles on demonstrations in solidarity against the assassination of George Jackson. And this was a special insert in Workers' World newspaper on Attica. And as you can see, it says Tom Soto reports from inside Attica. Okay. Okay, I think that speaks for itself. This talks about what this Prisoner Solidarity Committee is all about. We actually have this article up on workers.org that you'll be able to find. Okay, this is Tom Soto, observer at Attica. Okay, this is Tom's report. Okay, and these are articles from relatives who were trying to see their loved ones after the Attica Rebellion and how they were treated. Okay, and these were articles on the protest that erupted in many cities in response to the massacre of the prisoners at Attica, from New York to Buffalo, etc. And these are the listing of the 26 demands that the Attica revolutionaries made, which are really worth reading, every last one of them. This was another issue that came out right after the rebellion. Get more articles on that. Other prison rebellions that erupted. So this really gives you a feel for how our party was responding to these tremendous actions going on behind the walls. And again, you know, we are in solidarity with all the political prisoners. Many of them have been in prison 30, 40, 50 years, like, or even close to 60 years, like Rochelle MAGEE, whose parole was just turned down. At his hearing, was trying to get on parole. That hearing was turned down, and we will continue to fight for his freedom and the freedom of all political prisoners. So I think that's the end of the slideshow.
Thanks, Monica. Next, I'm going to introduce another comrade of ours, Comrade MYia X. She's a part of Workers' World Boston branch. She's an Afro-Caribbean immigrant, a mother, warrior, revolutionary artist, community activist, Creole, and writer. She has a spoken word piece for us today.
Revolutionary greetings, comrades and community around the globe, behind the wall. In this moment, I would like to anchor the spirit of Ubuntu. We are because they are, for all the warriors martyred throughout the resistance of the last 50 years. I invite you to join us by placing a name in the chat, for time limits us to be able to call on the names as we would do usually when we speak of libation. So I invite all the participants, whoever is able, to write that name in the chat of a fallen warrior martyred, and we will continue. This piece that I'm speaking tonight, I'm giving you a brief excerpt. It's an evolutionary piece that will reach its full culmination in the month of October, where we will commemorate Comandante Che Guevara, Comandante Thomas Sankara, and also be in solidarity with the spirit of Mandela and the Tribunal for Political Prisoners. And this piece is called Arise Sankofa. And Sankofa means to go back and get it and bring it forward. And that name is inspired by the one and only Shaka Sankofa, who was martyred and murdered by George W. Bush. Warriors in my mind, marrow and daily meditations. Awaken Sankofa. No R.I.P. Rest in peace until we abolish in the system. Without justice and reparations, the only R.I.P. is revolution in progress. Feeling in the air, but it ain't Phil Collins. Sound of the boom, comrades chanting. What's the call? What's the call? What's the call? Capitalism and its state apparatuses must fall. Study and sharpen revolutionary praxis. Timeful words of Field Marshal George Jackson. Blood in my eye? If you ain't read it, pick it up. Bring forward the vibrations, Soledad brothers. Guided by that revolutionary love, Jonathan Jackson. Fast forward. As we sit in this moment on September 2nd, 2021, I want us to go back September 2nd, 1971. As L.D. Barkley said, the sound before the fury. Imagine the planning and preparation on this day and the days to come. Arise, Sankofa. Arise, Sankofa. A new generation of revolutionary essential warriors and cadre, ready to go forward in battle, a luta continua, this revolutionary struggle. 50 years and the pigs ain't changed. 50 years and we still chanting out names. 50 years, and I remember back in 2008, I sat down and had a politicking session with Langston Hughes. I asked him about that America he wrote of in 1938, because I was witnessing some things in 2008. An historical illusion stood tall as a catalyst for change. In the presence of Lincoln's Illinois, solidified allegiance to the empire's killer state. How many? Too many to count. Too many to count. Yet in Geneva, he told the crowd as he accepted some kind of peace award, that the tools of war is necessary for peace. However, when the sound of the fury starts to rise and the spirit of Sankofa is awakened, we remember the words of Mother Harriet Tubman, that even though we hear the dogs barking, keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. Middle finger to their systems. Don't hold their truths to be self-evident. Their constitution, bills of rights, have done more wrongs, as Kunstler summed it up. This aura of legality has put more people to imprisonment and death. We must never forget. I feel inspired every time I see Comrade Chairman Fred Jr. He reminds me the Cubs are coming, chanting down Babylon, shutting Ish down. In this battle of ideas, never underestimate the seeds, because sometimes I'm revolutionary dreaming, sitting on the dock of Havana Bay, reflecting, not just with Otis and Che. Gil Scott Heron told us, the revolution will not be televised. Yet them 4 days of Attica was all over their television. I remember the words of one of the Attica warriors as Rockefeller decided to bring in them troops, because what's what they do when they said that the weapons of war are necessary for peace, but when we pick up the tools of resistance, they call in the guards for us, because this beast got tentacles like octopus and venom like snakes. But the martyrs and ancestors left us the recipes for these elixirs. Brick by brick, wall by wall. They struck the rock. And as the women of Swapo said, they dislodged a boulder, so they must be crushed. For we are a global tribe of warriors that says with no remorse, with bold audacity, double middle finger to the system. For Ho Chi Minh reminded us, as I'm sure the Attica warriors, as they prepared for the storm that was coming, and they knew they may not make it. I'm inclined to remember that the storm is a good opportunity for the pine and cypress trees to show their strength and stability, said Commandante Warrior Ho Chi Minh. We can no longer afford to be silent, because the greater pandemic that we must fight is to abolish this system, to abolish imperialism, to abolish capitalism, to abolish these prisons, pick the lock on every cell. It's time to bring home Sundiata Acoli. It's time to bring home Russell Maroon Schultz. It's time to bring home Leonard Peltier. It's time to bring home RUCHELL MAGEE. It is time to bring home Mumia Abu-Jamal. And we know that in us, revolutionaries around the globe who daily fight a tentacle from the beast of imperialism, in the spirit of the Attica warriors martyred, in the spirit of Delbert and Consuela Africa, in the spirit of Nani the Maroon, in the spirit of Mother Harriet Tubman, in the spirit of Tania the Gorilla and Madam Ben, Lolita LeBron and Marilyn Buck, Little Bobby Hutton, Hugo Pennell, and so many more. Let's stand united because it's open season in all 50 states and territories, brick by brick, wall by wall. Free them all. Sankofa rises. Thank you, comrades and community. To be continued, October.
Thank you so much for those inspiring words, mYia. And we look forward to hearing all of your presentation in October. Workers' World newspaper has been in continuous circulation since 1959. We are a daily news service. And if you go to workers.org and enter your email address, you can sign up for new articles from a revolutionary socialist perspective every day. We have a color print edition every month that can be delivered to your door. Every day and every issue, we cover international news as well as news within the US and its domestic colonies. We exchange articles with our allies in the movement, independent people's media, and socialist publications around the world. Workers' World really is an invaluable revolutionary media source. Each week we run our section, Tear Down the Walls, which is about the struggle for the abolition of the prison industrial complex. From our inside report from the Attica Uprising in 1971 to our weekly coverage today. You can subscribe to receive Workers' World newspaper and Tear Down the Walls by email at workers.org.
Thanks, Monica. As someone who works on the newspaper, I truly treasure working with you and everybody on the edit staff, which leads me to introduce someone who's also on edit staff. Ted Kelly is the co-editor of Tear Down the Walls and co-chair of the Prisoner Solidarity Committee of Workers' World Party. She, like me, also writes and organizes around prison abolition, anti-imperialism, and the environment.
Thanks, comrades. It's wonderful to be with you all tonight. I frankly have goosebumps after hearing Comrade mYia X's performance. That was tremendous, comrade, and it is truly an honor to be joining my fellow revolutionaries here to commemorate what is truly one of the most important uprisings in the history of the U.S., which is to say one of the most important anti-racist, anti-imperialist, and working class uprisings, because it's critical that we always remember that the working class includes our incarcerated brothers, sisters, and siblings. And I'm very glad that, my comrades have already raised up some of the names of political prisoners who are still behind bars, some after almost half a century, and like Rochelle MAGEE, like Sundiata Acoli, like Imam Jamil Al-Amin. And I just want to draw attention in my brief remarks tonight to a new generation of political prisoners that, as we commemorate the Attica Uprising, 50 years since that rebellion took place, in the intervening 2 generations or more that have taken place, so many more revolutionaries have learned from the example of Attica and have dedicated their lives to the struggle. And as a result, there are still many more political prisoners who we have to help free. And so I want to take time to make sure that we mention their names and hold them in our hearts as we talk about the rebellions of years past. Comrade Anthony Smith is a community leader, a teacher, and really a beloved organizer and activist in Philadelphia who was arrested and unjustly charged with bogus charges by a Trump federal prosecutor last year. He is still awaiting trial and has been threatened with minimum 7 years in federal prison for these completely bogus charges related to the George Floyd protests. So I would encourage folks to look up Free Ant PHL on social media. I also want to draw folks' attention to the case of Jessica Reznicek, who was a Dakota Access Pipeline protester who was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison in June of this year. You can go to supportjessicareznicek.com to support her, to write letters to her, and to learn more about the struggle to free this political prisoner. It's very important, especially as we acknowledge and are coming to grips with this historic defeat of US empire in the withdrawal of the US military from Afghanistan, that we remember Aafia Siddiqui, who was kidnapped in 2003 in Pakistan, along with her family, her children, and has since been sentenced to 86 years in federal prison. Her case is so incredibly shocking, and her kidnapping took place during the sort of launch, the inauguration of this new war on terror and global incarceration apparatus. Aafia Siddiqui was shot on her second day in custody by the US military agent. And I want to alert you to upcoming actions that are calling for the release of political prisoner Dr. Aafia Siddiqui and to demand her return to Pakistan. The US withdrawal from Afghanistan has sort of brought about many new calls for the release of Muslim prisoners framed up and jailed under the war on terror. Aafia was once again recently attacked and badly injured. She was hit with a pot of scalding coffee while in prison in Texas. So Workers' World has covered the horrendous conditions of her imprisonment, but we want to keep the pressure on. So there's going to be a demonstration in Houston, Texas, Monday, September 13th at 3 p.m. outside the Pakistan consulate. And there's also going to be a demonstration on September 18th at 5:30 p.m. outside the Carswell base in Fort Worth, Texas, where Aafia is being held. There are so many other political prisoners still locked up. We want to make sure that we raise once again the name of Daniel Hale, who was sentenced to almost 4 years in prison just a few months ago for revealing US crimes in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the region, for revealing, among other things, that the US targeted drone assassination program kills 90% civilians. And for this revelation of war crimes, Daniel Hale was sentenced under a treason for statute and is now in federal custody. And as I said, there are so many other people who are still locked up from the George Floyd uprisings in 2020. We also want to keep the name of Khalida Jarrar and other Palestinian political prisoners in our hearts, as well as other political prisoners, including those who are still held in Guantanamo Bay after over 20 years. And so I don't need to say any more. I think now we should just listen to one of the most world-renowned political prisoners in history, Mumia Abu-Jamal. This is a conversation I had with Mumia just a week or two ago. And I asked him about his recollections and his reflections on the 50th anniversary of Attica. And I was surprised that one of the first things he mentioned was the right-wing attack on protesters in Charlottesville in 2017. So without further ado, let's listen to Mumia. One of the other reasons that I wanted to talk to you is because on September 2nd, we're doing an event on the 50th anniversary of Attica. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts or statements or recollections that you'd be interested in making.
I think I told you what occurs to me now. Yeah. That the events down south of several years ago in Virginia were a turning point in American history, in my mind. Attica was a turning point in American, and I use the term loosely, corrections. Because it's like, what road will be taken? Where will this go? And the state, through Rockefeller, the governor of New York, chose the road of mass repression. The media largely supported his efforts. They maligned and lied against these men using really classic racism and fear. And they charged that these men killed the men that the state killed. I think it was 42 guards.
Right.
It took generations. I mean, to have courts say in a civil action that it was not so. But it wasn't true that day, that night, that month, that week. Attica became a hallmark of American corrections and really the American way of repression. And instead of a Tribune hour of liberation, you know, what those men asked for was no retaliation, no charges, and then specific things to the prison. And what else? Because they knew, because this was their house. They knew that the state, through prison officials, would kill them. They said, send us to another country. We would rather go to another country than endure this kind of repression. And, you know, they had press conferences, they wrote letters, they told this to the esteemed public officials and journalists who they met with. And I don't think people took them seriously. So it was too late. So what could have been a liberational moment became one of the most repressive moments, really, in American history. You know, some scholars say that, you know, more Americans were killed at Attica than in any event since the Civil War. I don't know about that, but I think it has a certain, you know, resonance. That may be so. I would have to think about that and see if I can find an exception to that rule. But generally, this was the naked face of the repressive state punishing people who wanted to be free. Think about it from this context. A few decades, well, in fact, perhaps one decade after Attica, an American president demanded that the prisoners in a neighboring socialist state kick out his prisoners and free them, and that they could come to the United States. I mean, what's the difference in principle here? You see? Now, here's the other side of that story. Thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of people fled Cuba, right? They called it the Mariel boat lift, right? Many of those people ended up in the American prison system. And they remain there today.
Fascinating.
Because even though they've served their sentences, America was like, you can stay in America, but you ain't going out. You see what I'm saying? Now,
yes.
That's the reality.
Wow.
You know, they're mostly, I think, they're in Terre Haute, Indiana. My point is that why was what an American president applicable, but what African American and Puerto Rican prisoners said was absurd? It was the same thing. Now, in point of fact, they might not have found a great life in the countries they wanted to go to, but, you know, hopefully they would have found freedom, something they did not have in the United States of America. They may have lived to an old age instead of being slaughtered by state troopers. And they wouldn't have found the kind of class and race denial that met their executions in Attica. Those are the things I think about when I think about Attica. That it really was a turning point, right? That could have gone, it was a live option that it could have gone another way. But for the political forces in New York State and in the United States. You know, this just didn't come from the governor so much as through the governor.
Exactly.
Rockefeller had political ambitions, right? As a Republican, I believe, official. And the United States didn't want the embarrassment of people demanding to be freed from the United States prisons. So they kind of killed two birds with one stone.
Those are powerful words from mYia, who remains one of the sharpest minds when it comes to understanding the U.S. prison industrial complex. Brick by brick, wall by wall, we're going to free Mumia Abu-Jamal. And thanks to Ted for raising some of the other political prisoners and for her editing of the Che video, adding powerful visuals and sound effects. And we ask that you please share the recording of this important commemorative program on our YouTube channel, Workers' World Party, with your friends and allies. And then before we close out the program, I wanted to draw attention to some protests coming up that the Prisoner Solidarity Committee of Workers' World Party is involved in. We have an event coming up this Saturday in Texas, in Dilley, Texas, where they are detaining migrants in a Texas prison at the Briscoe unit in Dilley. We're going to have a car caravan there. And then on September 9th, on the 50th anniversary of Attica in Buffalo, New York, there's also going to be a demonstration as well at MLK Park. We hope if you're in either of those areas, you can join us, because the struggle still continues to this day, and we're gonna fight until we win. And with that, I want to say, stay safe, don't fight capitalism alone, and build a workers' world. And thank you to everyone who joined us this evening.
Yeah, I just want to echo my thanks, and let's continue to fight to tear down the walls, to free all our brothers, sisters, and siblings, and to really build a workers' world. Thank you so much for joining us.